Welcome to History with Herodotus, where the boundaries of time and space are bridged by the power of storytelling. Today, we embark on a journey to explore one of the most pivotal moments in modern history, Operation Bagration, the Soviet Union's grand offensive against Nazi Germany during World War II. This monumental campaign, named after the Russian general Pyotr Bagration, who fell at the Battle of Borodino in 1812, would become the largest and most decisive military operation in the history of warfare. As we delve into the intricacies of Operation Bagration, let us first set our gaze upon the broader canvas of World War II. By the summer of 1944, the war had already raged for 5 years, with the Nazi war machine having ravaged much of Europe. The Eastern Front, where the Soviet Union clashed with Germany, had become a battleground of unimaginable scale and ferocity. Millions of soldiers and civilians had perished, leaving behind a scarred landscape and a deep-seated desire for vengeance. In the aftermath of the disastrous German defeat at Stalingrad in February 1943, the Wehrmacht had been in steady retreat, fighting a desperate rearguard action against the advancing Soviet forces. The tide of war was slowly but inexorably turning in favor of the Soviets, who had regained the initiative and were now poised to strike a crushing blow against their enemy. As the spring of 1944 gave way to summer, the Soviet High Command, led by Joseph Stalin and his chief military advisor, General Georgy Zhukov, began to contemplate a grand strategic offensive. The objective was nothing less than the complete destruction of the German Army Group Center, which had been the mainstay of the Wehrmacht's defenses on the Eastern Front. This would require an operation of unprecedented scale and complexity, involving millions of troops, thousands of tanks, and countless artillery pieces. The planning for Operation Bagration began in earnest in April 1944, when Stalin and his generals gathered at the Kremlin to discuss the finer details of the campaign. The Soviet leadership was determined to exploit the weaknesses of the German defenses, which had been stretched thin by the relentless pressure of the Soviet advances. As the Soviet forces began to mass along the front lines, a sense of anticipation and excitement gripped the troops. They knew that they were on the cusp of something momentous, a campaign that would decide the fate of the war and determine the course of history. In the weeks leading up to the launch of Operation Bagration, the Soviet forces engaged in a series of deceptive maneuvers designed to confuse and mislead the Germans. Fake radio transmissions, propaganda broadcasts, and carefully staged troop movements all contributed to a grand illusion, one that would convince the enemy that the main Soviet attack would come elsewhere. Meanwhile, the real preparations for the offensive were underway, with troops, tanks, and artillery being secretly concentrated in the areas where the main blows would fall. As the Soviet forces finalized their preparations, the air was thick with anticipation, the silence before the storm palpable. On June 23, 1944, the eve of the operation, General Georgy Zhukov, the chief architect of the campaign, stood atop a hill overlooking the front lines, his eyes scanning the horizon as the sun dipped below the Belarusian countryside. The next morning, at 4:00 a.m. on June 23, 1944, the Soviet artillery unleashed a maelstrom of steel and fire upon the German positions, as over 30,000 guns and mortars opened up along a 300-mile front. The earth shuddered beneath the feet of the soldiers, as the very foundations of the landscape seemed to tremble. The bombardment was so intense that it shattered windows and damaged buildings in nearby cities, a testament to its unbridled ferocity. As one Soviet soldier recalled, the ground shook like a living thing, and the sky turned a deep crimson, as if the very heavens themselves were aflame. As the artillery fire lifted, the Soviet infantry and armor surged forward, pouring into the breaches like a mighty tidal wave crashing against the shore. The German defenses, already weakened by months of relentless pressure, began to crumble beneath the onslaught. By the end of the first day, the Soviets had broken through the enemy lines in multiple sectors, opening up vast avenues for exploitation. The once formidable German Army Group Center was now reeling, its cohesion shattered by the sheer scale and ferocity of the Soviet attack. On June 25, 1944, as the operation entered its third day, the Soviet forces achieved a major breakthrough near the town of Vitebsk, where the First Baltic Front, led by General Hovhannes Bagramian, shattered the German defenses and began to pour into the enemy's rear. The Germans, caught off guard by the speed and ferocity of the Soviet advance, stumbled backward in disarray, their communications and supply lines severed. As one German soldier later recalled, "We were like a ship without anchor or rudder, lost in a stormy sea, unable to comprehend the chaos that surrounded us." As the Soviet forces continued to push westward, they encountered pockets of fierce resistance, where desperate German units fought to the last man in a bid to stem the tide. One such battle took place near the town of Orsha, where a ragtag group of German soldiers, armed with nothing but rifles and grenades, held off an entire Soviet tank brigade for hours, buying precious time for their comrades to retreat. Though ultimately doomed, their bravery in the face of overwhelming odds would become the stuff of legend, inspiring future generations to stand against impossible odds. By June 28, 1944, just 5 days into the operation, the Soviets had already achieved a crushing victory, having encircled and destroyed several major German formations, including the I Corps and the Twente Corps. The road to Minsk, the capital of Belarus, now lay open, and the Soviet forces were poised to deliver the coup de grace. As General Zhukov later remarked, "The enemy was like a wounded beast, thrashing about in its death throes. We had only to finish the job." On June 29, 1944, Soviet forces stormed into Minsk, capturing the city and marking a decisive turning point in the operation. The German Army Group Center, once a formidable force, had been shattered, with estimates suggesting over 300,000 casualties, including killed, wounded, or captured soldiers. The remnants of the German army were in full retreat, pursued relentlessly by the Soviet forces. In the aftermath of the battle, the Soviets continued their westward advance, pushing deep into Lithuania and Poland. By mid-July, they had reached the Vistula River, marking a significant milestone in their campaign to liberate Eastern Europe from German occupation. As one Soviet soldier recalled, "The sense of liberation was palpable as we freed town after town from the grip of the enemy. It was as if the very fabric of history was being rewritten before our eyes." As Operation Bagration drew to a close, its impact on the war effort became increasingly evident. The operation had also marked a significant shift in the balance of power on the Eastern Front, as the Soviet Union emerged as a dominant force, capable of inflicting catastrophic defeats on the German army. Today, Operation Bagration is remembered as one of the most significant military campaigns of World War II. A testament to the bravery and sacrifice of the Soviet soldiers who fought against overwhelming odds. As historian David Glantz has noted, Operation Bagration was a masterpiece of Soviet operational art, a campaign that showcased the Red Army's ability to plan and execute large-scale operations with precision and devastating effect. The operation's legacy extends far beyond the battlefield. However, as it marked a turning point in the war, paving the way for the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany and the liberation of Eastern Europe. In Belarus, where the operation took place, Operation Bagration is still commemorated today, with monuments and memorials dedicated to the Soviet soldiers who fought and died during the campaign. The operation's impact on the region was profound, as it marked the beginning of a long process of rebuilding and recovery, following years of brutal occupation and devastation. As one Belarusian veteran remembered, "The war was a terrible thing, but Operation Bagration gave us hope that we might one day be free from the enemy's grasp and rebuild our shattered lives." The operation marked a turning point in world history, as the Soviet Union emerged as a dominant force, shaping the course of international relations for decades to come. It also serves as a reminder of the devastating consequences of war. As millions of soldiers and civilians were caught up in the maelstrom of conflict, their lives forever changed by the experience. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, remember that, to understand the present, we must first understand the past.